Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are exploring a seriously fascinating linguistic landscape. We're looking at the very architecture of communication, specifically focusing on English versus Uzbek discourse. Now, you might think that translating between English and Uzbek is simply a matter of swapping out vocabulary, right? Like, you just find the matching word in a dictionary, plug it in, and move on. But, as we're going to see, it is so much more than that. It's actually about navigating entirely different frameworks of how we package information. It's really about how we build ideas, right from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to take a bit of a micro to macro journey today. We'll start at the ground level with grammar and pronoun rules, scale all the way up to academic writing and rhetoric, explore the discursive personality, look at art and narrative discourse, and finally, move beyond cultural stereotypes.
Section 1. Grammar and Pronoun Rules.
To truly understand the architecture of these two languages, we have to start right at the foundation, which is everyday conversational differences. These are the micro-level building blocks that anchor literally everything else we're going to talk about today. Take, for instance, subject-pronoun placement. If you want to say that you and a friend arrive somewhere, English enforces a really strict rule. The first-person singular pronoun, I, has to stand in the final position when there are multiple subjects. It is always, Bob and I came at 9 o'clock. But in Uzbek, pronoun placement is highly flexible. You can say, Men Bob sat novi the keldik, putting I first, or you can toss it second. Both ways are perfectly natural.
So, why does this flexibility even exist? Well, it all comes down to the highly developed inflectional system in Uzbek verbs. Basically, the verbs themselves are doing the heavy lifting by carrying the information about exactly who is acting. Because of this, personal pronouns in Uzbek often become completely optional. You can say men talabaman for I am a student, or you can just drop the pronoun entirely and say talabaman. The meaning is entirely preserved right there in the verb. Now, for Uzbek students who are learning English, this fundamental difference is a huge deal. It often causes structural friction and interlanguage interference. It leads to stylistic errors like saying I and Bob came, simply because they're mapping that awesome Uzbek flexibility onto super rigid English rules.
Section 2. Academic Writing and Rhetoric.
So, we've seen the micro-grammatical tools. Let's see how they scale up into macro-rhetorical strategies, particularly in the highly structured world of academic publishing. What's absolutely fascinating here is how the different approaches to academic abstracts contrast. Based on the source data, English research abstracts tend to act almost like promotional pitches. Seriously, they rely heavily on finite research verbs, explicit data statements, and big contribution claims to essentially sell the value of the study. The Uzbek tendency, on the other hand, is distinctly expository. Uzbek abstracts focus heavily on comprehensive description, really broad disciplinary contextualization, and detailed method inventories. They're basically laying out the entire landscape of the research, rather than aggressively pitching its novelty.
The crucial takeaway here is that we are looking at a difference in rhetorical visibility versus information packaging. And I want to be super clear. One style is not inherently superior to the other. Not at all. Both the English and Uzbek abstracts are performing the exact same communicative functions. They both communicate the research perfectly. They just pull it off through entirely different forms of visibility and structural packaging.
Section 3. The discursive personality.
Now, moving from academic writing over to literature requires us to explore how these different linguistic packages actually create a unique discursive personality for both the authors writing the text and the characters living inside them. To wrap our heads around this, we need to define the anthropocentric paradigm. In modern linguistics, this paradigm basically argues that language isn't just some cold mechanical system. The human factor is the core of the whole communication process. A discursive personality is the idea that language reflects a person's social position, their professional intent, and their cognitive functions. Think of it like the human fingerprint left right on the text.
And researchers have actually found really distinct differences in how this discursive personality manifests. When you compare literary texts side by side, English texts show a significantly higher prevalence of what's called represented speech. This is where characters' thoughts and situational responses are tightly woven directly into the narrative structure. You also see a lot of stylistic convergence, where different literary devices are drawn together to create one singular powerful effect.
And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast. Because English relies so heavily on that represented speech and stylistic markedness, it requires a very specific, delicate balance of interpretative ability from the reader just to decode the author's intent. Uzbek literary texts, conversely, lean hard into stylistic heterogeneity. They mix different functional styles together. It creates this incredibly rich, multi-layered tapestry that achieves its aesthetic and cognitive functions through variety rather than convergence.
Section 4.
art and narrative discourse. Let's shift our lens slightly from literature over to art history. We've talked grammar, we've talked science and literature. Now let's look at how narratives are constructed in visual discourse across these languages. The source text here represent Uzbek academic discourse analyzing the works of Pablo Picasso. What the scholars focus on is the critical distinction between narrative and non-narrative elements in art criticism. So, in these texts, non-narrative discourse is used to state objective truths and general knowledge about the artist's life. But narrative discourse, that is used to express the human reaction, the emotional sequences, the subjective feelings, and the progression of time within pieces like Guernica or his famous portraits.
To bridge the gap between those cold, objective facts and the warm, emotional narratives, both English and Uzbek art discourse rely heavily on similes and metaphors. The sources highlight familiar phrases like hungry as a bear or happiness is like sunshine. And look, these aren't just pretty words. They are essential structural tools. They allow the writer to take completely abstract concepts, like the intense emotional weight of a Picasso painting, and anchor them to a tangible, universally understood experience for the reader.
Section 5. Beyond Cultural Stereotypes.
Which brings us to the climax of our explainer. We absolutely need to address the biggest myth in cross-language discourse analysis. After looking at all of this, the differences in pronoun rules, how English pitches research while Uzbek contextualizes it, how their literatures utilize style, you really have to ask yourself, are these differences just fixed national cultural traits? Like, is there simply an English mindset and an Uzbek mindset that biologically dictates all of this?
The answer is a definitive, absolute no.
The researchers make this incredibly clear. We are looking at a discursal tendency, not a cultural essence. An English abstract isn't promotional because of some immutable national character. It's promotional because of journal policies, the epistemology of the discipline, and how academic writing is currently taught in that environment. The differences we've explored today are the result of structural, methodological, and institutional choices. It's about the rules of the game they were taught to play, not who they inherently are.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If translating between languages isn't about cultural stereotyping, but rather about understanding differing institutional structures and information packaging, how does recognizing these deep structural differences reshape the way you approach global communication? The next time you read a translated text, ask yourself, what architecture is hiding just beneath the words? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning and keep looking deeper.